Could you provide an overview of the legal framework governing the operations of UNIFIL forces in Lebanon and the implications of these repeated Israeli attacks?
Yes. The UNIFIL forces in the south of Lebanon have been mandated by the United Nations Security Council back in the late 70s, in 1978, but also again in a new resolution in 2006. These forces are peacekeeping forces that are supposed to observe the border, to observe any breach of the ceasefire that was decided then, and to report back to the United Nations. Peacekeeping forces should not be targeted by any of the conflicting parties. The fact that the Israeli army has targeted these forces more than once now is an assault, first on the United Nations, but also on international humanitarian law, which regulates, it regulates the way that states conduct war and the type of targets that are admissible by international law. And this is not admissible. Hitting and targeting UN forces, peacekeeping forces, is a grave breach of international humanitarian law, which means that it is a war crime.
Thank you for that, Professor. And now to Beirut, Saeed Al-Qazza. How do you view the recent Israeli attacks on UNIFIL forces, and what do you think might be the implications for peacekeeping operations in Lebanon?
Good evening, sir. Good evening, dear audience. Targeting the peacekeeping forces working in South Lebanon is a great breach of the international humanitarian law. It's also a violation of Resolution 1701, one that grants the peacekeeping forces operating in South Lebanon the mandate to support the Lebanese army to maintain peace and stability and security and evacuate the area from the armed people. The Israeli enemy forces commits only crimes and massacres, war crimes and crimes against humanity. Also, their aggression against the peacekeeping forces is a war crime that it should be held accountable for in the International Court of Justice.
And going back to you, Professor Nasibeh, how do these repeated Israeli strikes against UNIFIL forces reflect on the legality of their military targets, Israel's military targets, within the context of international law, in which you're an expert?
Thank you very much for your very good question, actually. The targeting of UN forces could not have happened if Israel has not enjoyed full impunity for all the attacks that it has been implementing against the civilian population, both in Lebanon and, of course, in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip and other locations. The fact that Israel has, until today, not been sanctioned by the UN Security Council, and of course there are the UN's General Assembly has decided sanctions, and there are certain individual countries that have actually started to sanction Israel in many different ways. But the fact that these sanctions are still very limited means that Israel can continue to breach international law, breach the orders of the International Court of Justice, and feel secure, and feel that these crimes and these violations will not bring about any consequences for the state of Israel. So I would actually, and by the way, this is not the only attack now against the UN. Israel has also decided to prohibit the work of the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees, the UNRWA, in parts of Palestine, including occupied Jerusalem. And until now, all we hear is condemnations and criticism. In some cases, even this criticism is very shy. As long as there is no accountability for violations and for crimes, Israel will continue to breach international law, will continue with the genocide, will continue ignoring the UN and blaming the UN and all of its legal experts and human rights rapporteurs that Israel will continue to blame all of them instead of abiding by its international law obligations.